The humans' ancient warship tore through the void of space, engines roaring. As stunned Galactic councillors watched the blinking sensor displays in utter disbelief. Klaxons blared, red lights flashed, displays flickered. Samuel Young, the grizzled human veteran at the ship's helm, allowed himself a tight smile. He reached out a scarred hand, flipping switches to power up the vessel's immense particle cannons and railguns. Targeting reticles appeared on his forward view screens, locking onto the distant shapes of Zorvax's rebel fleet. Just hours ago, Samuel had been drinking alone in his cramped freighter, aimlessly wandering the fringes of civilized space. Then the encrypted message from Odin had arrived, a dire plea from his old Barzan squadmate. The ruthless warlord Zorvax had seized a top-secret prototype warship and was poised to overthrow the Galactic Council. Only Samuel, with his knowledge of ancient human security codes, could infiltrate the ship through a hidden maintenance hatch. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Samuel had to succeed. He was the Council's only hope. Now here he was, the sole human on the bridge of this resurrected behemoth from humanity's past. A ship that shouldn't exist. A ship the galaxy had all but forgotten. "Warship Odyssey to Council Fleet," Samuel broadcast on all frequencies. "Engaging hostile forces. I'll keep these bastards busy, just like old times, Odin, you scaly son of a bitch." Samuel's fingers found the firing controls. The ship shuddered as a hail of tungsten rods, accelerated to a fraction of light speed, erupted from the Odyssey's bow, lancing out into the darkness towards the enemy fleet. The battle for the galaxy had begun, and Samuel was damn sure he'd make the Council regret ever doubting humanity's strength. With this ancient vessel under his command, he would make the warlord Zorvax wish he had never been born. Samuel stared at the schematics on his datapad, his eyes narrowing as he traced the intricate pathways and conduits of the warship's design. The technology was unlike anything he had encountered before, a dizzying array of advanced systems seamlessly integrated into the vessel's structure. It was almost as if the ship had been built by humans, but from a distant, forgotten era. "Odin," Samuel said, his voice low and tense as he looked up at the Barzan. "Where did you get these schematics? This isn't Barzan technology. It's human." Odin shifted uncomfortably, his scales rippling with unease. "The Council, they found an ancient human warship drifting in space. We studied it, learned from it. But the Council, they feared the power it represented. They banned further research." "And Zorvax, he continued anyway, didn't he?" Odin nodded, his eyes downcast. He believed that the technology could give us an edge, make us stronger. But now he's gone too far. Samuel clenched his fists, anger and betrayal warring within him. But there was no time for recriminations, no time for the luxury of rage. Zorvax had to be stopped, and Samuel was the only one who could do it. He made his way to the Barzan supply depot, slipping past the guards with practiced ease. In the chaos of the loading bay, he found his chance, stowing away aboard a cargo ship bound for Zorvax's warship. The journey was tense, each moment stretching into an eternity as Samuel huddled in the darkness, listening to the hum of the engines and the distant chatter of the crew. When the ship finally docked, he waited, biding his time until the coast was clear. Moving through the warship's corridors, Samuel relied on his knowledge of human technology to navigate the labyrinthine passages, avoiding patrols and security systems with a combination of skill and intuition. He was close now, the maintenance hatch just ahead, his objective within reach. And then the alarms began to blare. Suddenly the corridor was awash with flashing red lights, the sound of booted feet echoing from every direction. Samuel barely had time to take cover before the first Barzan soldiers appeared, their plasma rifles spitting deadly bolts of energy as they advanced. Outgunned and outmanned, Samuel had no choice but to retreat, the searing heat of the plasma bolts singing his hair as he ducked and weaved through the corridors. His mind raced as he sought a way to complete his mission, to reach the maintenance hatch and stop Zorvax before it was too late. Samuel ducked behind a bulkhead as plasma bolts sizzled past, the acrid smell of melted metal filling his nostrils. He checked his suit's power levels. The cloaking device was draining his reserves fast. He needed a new plan, and he needed it now. Activating the cloak, Samuel vanished from sight, the Barzan's shot suddenly hitting nothing but air. He moved quickly, his footsteps silent on the metal deck, and made his way towards the ship's armory. If the Barzans had been studying human tech, maybe they had something he could use. The armory doors hissed open, revealing rows of gleaming weapons. Samuel's eyes widened as he spotted a sleek, angular gun nestled among the Barzan rifles. He'd seen schematics of this in old Earth military archives, a handheld railgun capable of accelerating a projectile to hypersonic speeds. He grabbed the weapon and a bandolier of ammunition, the weight reassuring in his hands. As he slipped back into the corridors, Samuel's comms crackled to life. He froze, listening intently. Zorvax wants the main weapon ready for a test fire within the hour. Target is the Galactic Council outpost on Theros Prime. Let's show those bureaucrats what real power looks like. Samuel's blood ran cold. Theros Prime was a peaceful research station, populated by scientists from a dozen different species. If Zorvax fired on them... He broke into a run, his mind racing. The maintenance hatch was too well guarded. He needed another way in. His suit's computer pinged, highlighting a network of service tunnels running throughout the ship. It was a tight fit, but it would have to do. Samuel crawled through the narrow passages, his breath echoing in the confined space. The ship shuddered around him, the deck plates groaning as the vessel dropped out of hyperspace. Time was running out. He emerged from the tunnels, the maintenance hatch just meters away. But as he approached, shadows detached from the walls, resolving into a squad of elite Barzan guards, their weapons aimed squarely at his chest. Samuel didn't hesitate. The railgun bucked in his hands, hypersonic slugs screeching through the air. The Barzans fell, their armor shredding like tissue paper under the onslaught. But more took their place, pouring into the corridor, plasma bolts filling the air. Samuel felt a searing pain as a bolt grazed his side, his suit's shields flickering. He kept firing, the railgun growing hot in his hands, but the Barzans kept coming. His ammo counter ticked down towards zero. This was it. This was how it ended. And then the world turned upside down. The ship heaved, alarms screaming as the deck lurched beneath Samuel's feet. He grabbed for a handhold, his ears ringing from the sudden chaos. Over the din, a panicked voice shouted across the comms. The explosions rocked the ship, sending Barzans sprawling. Samuel seized his chance, surging forward through the smoke and chaos. He blasted through the disoriented guards with his railgun, hypersonic slugs ripping through their armor. Reaching the maintenance hatch, Samuel's fingers flew over the keypad, inputting the ancient security code. The pieces suddenly clicked into place in his mind. This was no random attack, but a coordinated Galactic Council strike. Odin must have tracked his movements and launched an assault to aid his mission. The hatch hissed open, and Samuel plunged inside, emerging into the warship's central control core. Zorvax spun to face him, his reptilian eyes widening in shock and rage. The warlord's lieutenants reached for their weapons, but Samuel was already moving. He lunged forward, engaging the Barzans hand-to-hand. His human reflexes and training proved superior, allowing him to dodge their blows and strike with devastating precision. Samuel fought like a man possessed, driven by the knowledge that billions of lives depended on his success. As he grappled with a particularly burly lieutenant, Samuel's gaze fell on a strange device connected to the ship's main power core. Glowing conduits snaked from the device, pulsing with stolen energy as they fed into the warship's main weapon. This had to be how Zorvax intended to amplify the weapon's destructive power. Samuel hurled his opponent aside and fought his way toward the device, intent on destroying it. But Zorvax intercepted him, slamming into him with the force of a raging bull. They tumbled to the deck, locked in a brutal struggle. "So you think you've won, human?" Zorvax snarled, his claws scrabbling at Samuel's throat. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." Samuel headbutted the warlord, feeling the satisfying crunch of breaking cartilage. "Enlighten me," he spat, throwing a vicious elbow. Zorvax laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "That device? It's not Barzan technology. It's a relic from your own kind, human, an ancient advanced civilization that once ruled the galaxy. He sneered, his blood-flecked teeth gleaming. We found it in the ruins of a dead human world, studied it, and now its power is mine. With a roar of fury, Samuel wrenched free of Zorvax's grip and lunged for the device. His fingers closed around it, and with a massive effort, he tore it free from its housing. Zorvax screamed in rage and fear as Samuel hurled the device to the floor, smashing it to pieces. Alarms blared, warning lights flashing red. The ship shuddered violently, its power core destabilizing. Samuel knew he had only moments before the entire vessel exploded. He ran, vaulting over consoles and fallen bodies as he raced for the escape pods. Barzans scattered before him, too focused on their own survival to stop his flight. Samuel threw himself into a pod, slamming his fist against the launch controls. The pod blasted free from the dying warship, mere seconds before a blinding flash lit the void. The shockwave slammed into the tiny craft, sending it tumbling end over end. Samuel clung to the harness, his teeth rattling in his skull as the pod's stabilizers fought to regain control. As the tumbling slowed, Samuel peered out the viewport. His heart leaped as he saw a familiar sight. Odin's ship, fast approaching, ready to bring him home. But even as relief washed over him, Samuel's thoughts raced with the implications of Zorvax's revelations. The Barzans had discovered ancient human technology, relics of a civilization lost to the depths of time. What other secrets might lay hidden among the stars, waiting to be discovered? The pod docked with Odin's ship, and the airlock cycled open. Samuel stepped through, his mind awhirl with questions. The battle was won, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something much larger. Something that could change the galaxy forever. Samuel stepped off the transport shuttle onto the landing pad, the Galactic Council's capital world stretching out before him in a dazzling array of gleaming spires and bustling skyways. A sea of faces, human and alien alike, cheered as he emerged, their voices rising in a deafening roar. "Samuel! Samuel! Samuel!" They chanted his name like a mantra, a talisman against the darkness that had so nearly consumed them all. He raised a hand in acknowledgement, his features set in a somber mask. The weight of what he had learned aboard Zorvax's ship still pressed heavily upon him, the implications staggering. Odin emerged from the shuttle behind him, the Barzan's scaled features etched with a mix of relief and concern. "The council is waiting," he said quietly, his voice nearly lost in the din of the crowd. "They want a full debriefing." Samuel nodded, his jaw tightening. He knew what he had to do. The council chamber was a vast circular space, its walls lined with the flags and emblems of 100 different worlds. At its center, a massive holographic display flickered and danced, casting shifting patterns of light across the gathered dignitaries. Samuel stood before them, Odin at his side, and told his story. He spoke of Zorvax's betrayal, of the ancient human warship and the technology it contained. He spoke of the device, the relic of a forgotten age, and the terrible power it had nearly unleashed. When he was done, silence reigned, the councillors staring at him in stunned disbelief. "Impossible," another murmured. "We would have known." Odin stepped forward, his eyes gleaming. "There have been rumors," he said, his voice carrying in the stillness, legends passed down through the generations, of an ancient civilization that predated the council, that spanned the stars and commanded technologies we can scarcely imagine. He turned to Samuel, his expression grave, but no concrete evidence until now. The chamber erupted into a frenzy of whispers and speculation, the councillors arguing and gesticulating. Samuel waited, his heart pounding, until finally the clamor died down. The head councillor, a wizened Thyraxian with piercing violet eyes, rose to his feet. "This information," he said, his voice heavy with import, "it changes everything. If what you say is true, it could reshape our understanding of the galaxy, of our place in it." He fixed Samuel with a penetrating stare. "But it must be investigated further, and it must be kept secret for now. The public is not ready for such revelations. Samuel nodded, his resolve hardening. I understand. The councillor turned to his fellows, his expression grim. I propose a covert mission, he said, his words ringing out in the chamber. To uncover the truth about humanity's past, to follow the trail left by these ancient ruins and artifacts. He looked to Samuel once more, his gaze unwavering. And I can think of no one better to lead it than the hero who stands before us now. Samuel felt the weight of that gaze, the burden of the task being laid upon him, but he did not flinch, did not hesitate. I accept, he said, his voice firm. I will find the truth, whatever it may be. The preparations began immediately, Samuel assembling a team of trusted allies and specialists. Odin was the first to volunteer, his knowledge of Barzan research invaluable. Others followed, a brilliant Zinari scientist, a grizzled Corvan mercenary, a lithe Zephyrian infiltrator. Together they pored over the data Samuel had retrieved from Zorvax's ship, cross-referencing it with the Council's own archives. They retraced the steps of the Barzan researchers, following the trail of clues across the galaxy. And with each new discovery, each shattered ruin and fragment of ancient technology, a picture began to emerge, of a vast human empire spanning the stars, its power and knowledge far surpassing anything the Council races had achieved. But there were shadows amidst the light, hints of a great cataclysm that had brought the ancient humans low, a catastrophic event that had left only scattered remnants of their once great civilization. As Samuel and his team delved deeper into the mystery, they began to encounter resistance. Equipment malfunctioned, leads went cold, informants vanished. Someone, it seemed, was determined to keep the truth buried. They pressed on, undeterred, even as the dangers mounted. Sabotage aboard their ship, an ambush on a desolate world, a sniper's laser sighting glinting in the darkness. Each incident only fueled Samuel's determination, his need to know the truth. And then came the break they had been searching for, a fragmentary data file, recovered from a ruined human outpost on the fringes of known space. It spoke of a hidden archive, a repository of the ancient humans' greatest secrets, lost to the ages. The trail led them to an uncharted system, a lone star orbited by the shattered remnants of long-dead worlds. They followed the data file's coordinates to a barren, airless moon, its surface scarred and pitted by eons of impacts. And there, hidden beneath the rubble of a collapsed mountain range, they found it. A vast underground complex, its walls etched with strange symbols and humming with an eerie, otherworldly power. They entered cautiously, weapons drawn, scanning for any sign of threat. But the complex was long abandoned, its corridors empty and echoing. And at its heart they found something that shook them to their very core. A chamber, filled with row upon row of stasis pods, each one containing a single human form, suspended in a dreamless sleep. Samuel approached one of the pods, his heart racing, and wiped away the condensation obscuring its surface. The face that stared back at him was achingly familiar, a mirror of his own. Samuel reached out, his fingers trembling, and pressed the release mechanism on the stasis pod. With a hiss of escaping gas, the pod opened, and the figure within stirred, eyelids fluttering. They stood there, transfixed, as the ancient human awakened, his eyes blinking open to stare at them across the gulf of ages. And in that moment, Samuel knew that everything was about to change, that the secrets buried here in this forgotten place would rewrite the very fabric of galactic history. The future, he realized, was no longer certain, and the role that he and his fellow humans would play in shaping it had only just begun. The stasis pod hissed open, cold mist billowing out as the ancient human stirred. Samuel and his team stepped back, weapons at the ready, unsure what to expect. The figure sat up slowly, blinking in the harsh light of the chamber. He looked around, taking in the rows of stasis pods, the alien faces of Samuel's team. When his gaze settled on Samuel, his eyes widened in recognition. "You're human," he said, his voice rough from centuries of disuse. "How long has it been?" Samuel lowered his weapon, a strange mix of awe and trepidation washing over him. "We don't know," he admitted. "Humanity hasn't had a presence in the galaxy for a long time. We thought we were the only ones left." The ancient human nodded, as if this confirmed something he had long suspected. He swung his legs over the side of the pod and stood, his movements stiff but sure. "I am Admiral Varus Kale," he said, "commander of the human fleet, or at least I was." He walked past the stunned team, making his way to a control panel set into the wall. His fingers danced over the keys, entering commands with a speed and surety that spoke of long practice. The chamber hummed with power, lights flickering on, holographic displays springing to life. "Come," Admiral Kale said, gesturing for them to follow. "There is much you need to see." He led them through a series of corridors, deeper into the heart of the complex. As they walked, he spoke, his voice echoing in the stillness. "When the cataclysm came," he said, "we knew we had to leave. Our technology in the wrong hands could have destroyed the galaxy. So we hid it away, scattered across 100 worlds, and put ourselves into stasis, to be awakened when the time was right." They emerged into a massive hangar bay, and Samuel's breath caught in his throat. Before them, arrayed in perfect formation, was a fleet of warships unlike anything he had ever seen. Sleek and deadly, they seemed to pulse with barely contained power. Samuel and his team spread out, marveling at the ships. Odin ran his hands over the hull of the nearest vessel, his eyes wide with wonder. "This technology," he breathed, "it's centuries ahead of anything the Council has." Admiral Kale nodded. "Faster than light drives that don't require hyperspace lanes," he said, pointing to the engines. "Energy shields that can withstand the impact of a small moon, and weapons." He trailed off, his expression darkening. "Weapons capable of destroying entire planets." Samuel felt a chill run down his spine. Such power in the wrong hands. A sudden beeping from the control panel shattered the moment. Admiral Kale frowned, moving to investigate. His face paled as he read the display. "We have incoming," he said, his voice tight. "A fleet bearing down on our location. They'll be here in minutes." Samuel's mind raced. The architect, it had to be. But how had they found them so quickly? "We have to get these ships out of here," he said, turning to his team. "We can't let the architect get their hands on this technology." Samuel reeled back as if struck. Destroy it? Destroy the only chance humanity had to reclaim its place in the galaxy? But even as he opened his mouth to argue, he saw the truth in Admiral Kale's eyes. The ancient human was right. This technology, as powerful as it was too dangerous. It had to be kept out of the architect's hands, no matter the cost. Samuel turned to his team, his jaw set. "Prepare for battle," he said, his voice ringing with command. "We hold the line here. We give Admiral Kale the time he needs to set the self-destruct." They scrambled to obey, taking up defensive positions around the hangar. Samuel stood shoulder to shoulder with Odin, his railgun primed and ready. Samuel shook his head. "No," he said, his eyes fixed on the hangar entrance. "This is how it begins. This is how we honor the legacy of our ancestors. This is how we protect the galaxy." The first enemy ship screamed into view, weapons blazing. Samuel and his team opened fire, the hangar erupting into a maelstrom of light and sound. They fought with everything they had, pouring their heart and soul into every shot, every movement. Behind them, Admiral Kale worked furiously at the control panel, his fingers flying over the keys. The countdown to self-destruct ticked down, seconds stretching into eternity. And then, with a final resounding boom, it was over. The complex shuddered, the ships in the hangar crumpling like tin cans as the self-destruct tore through them. Samuel and his team were thrown to the ground, the breath knocked from their lungs. In the sudden ringing silence that followed, Samuel pulled himself to his feet. He looked around, taking in the devastation, the smoking ruins of humanity's last, best hope. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Admiral Kale, his face streaked with soot and blood, but his eyes alive with a fierce, unyielding pride. You did well, the ancient human said, his voice a whisper in the stillness. You honored our legacy, you protected the galaxy, that's all any of us can ask for. Samuel nodded, a lump in his throat. He looked to his team, battered and bruised but alive, and he knew that Admiral Cale was right. They had done what needed to be done. They had made the hard choice. And as they limped back to their ship, leaving the ruins of the outpost behind, Samuel knew that their fight was far from over. The architect was still out there, still searching for the secrets of the ancient humans. But Samuel and his team would be ready. They would stand against the darkness, no matter the cost. They would protect the galaxy as humanity had always done. For they were the guardians, the inheritors of a legacy as old as the stars themselves, and they would not fail. The architect's forces swarmed the ancient outpost, plasma bolts sizzling through the air as Samuel and his team sprang into action. Samuel sprinted for the control room, barking orders into his comms. Odin, get those ships online. Corvin, Zephyr, hold the perimeter. Buy us as much time as you can. He burst into the control room, his fingers flying over the ancient human interfaces. The outpost's defenses roared to life, hidden turrets emerging from the walls and opening fire on the advancing soldiers. In the hangar, Odin and the others worked feverishly, deciphering the ancient human systems. Reroute power from the secondary grid, Odin shouted, his claws tapping at the holographic controls. Bypass the tertiary security protocols. The deck shuddered beneath their feet as the first warship's engines flared to life. She's online, Odin roared. Get aboard now! Outside, the defensive perimeter was crumbling. Corvin and Zephyr fell back, their weapons glowing hot as they poured fire into the oncoming horde. Samuel! Corvin bellowed into his comms. We can't hold them much longer. Samuel gritted his teeth, initiating the outpost's self-destruct sequence. Fall back to the hangar, he ordered. We're leaving. They raced through the corridors, the sounds of battle raging behind them. The architect's soldiers poured into the hangar, just as the team scrambled aboard the last warship. Samuel slammed his fist on the launch controls, the ship's engines screaming as it tore free from the hangar bay. Behind them, the outpost exploded in a blinding flash, the shockwave buffeting their ship as they clawed for the stars. But their relief was short-lived. As they broke orbit, a massive fleet materialized before them, ships bearing the architect's sigil. Evasive maneuvers, Samuel shouted, wrenching the ship into a dizzying roll as the first salvo of enemy fire scorched past. The ancient human warships were powerful, but they were badly outnumbered. Samuel gripped the controls, his knuckles white as he hurled the ship into the fray. The flagship's weapons blazed, tearing through the architect's ships like they were made of paper, but for every ship they destroyed, 2 more took its place. We can't win this, Zephyr cried, her console sparking as a blast rocked the ship. We don't need to win, Samuel snarled. We just need to survive. But even as he spoke, he knew their chances were slim. The architect had been planning this for a long time. They had the numbers, the firepower. It was only a matter of time. Suddenly, a transmission crackled across the comms. Samuel Young. The voice was distorted, unrecognizable. The truth lies within. Coordinates attached. Samuel stared at the flickering coordinates, his mind racing. Could this be it? The key to exposing the architect, to ending this once and for all? But first they had to survive. Samuel wrenched the ship into a desperate climb, the hull groaning under the stress. Odin, he shouted, I need more power to the shields. We're already redlining, Odin shot back, his claws dancing over the controls. The reactors can't take much more. Samuel gritted his teeth, watching as the architect's ships closed in around them. They were out of options, out of time. But he'd be damned if he was going to give up now. Not with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance, not with the legacy of his ancestors riding on his shoulders. He tightened his grip on the controls, his eyes narrowing as he prepared to make his final stand. The battle raged around them, the void of space lit by the fires of 1,000 ships. And at the heart of it all, a single, battered warship, fighting against the odds, carrying the hopes and dreams of a long-forgotten humanity on its shoulders. The ancient warship shuddered as another volley of enemy fire slammed into its shields. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles, the acrid stench of burnt circuitry filling the bridge. Samuel gritted his teeth, his hands flying over the controls as he wrenched the ship into a stomach-churning dive. "Odin," he shouted over the blaring alarms, "tell me you've got those coordinates locked in." Samuel nodded grimly. It was a risk they'd have to take. With a final defiant salvo from their rear cannons, he punched the ship into hyperspace, the stars stretching into endless lines of light. They emerged into a maelstrom of swirling gases and crackling energy, the nebula's heart pulsing with an eerie, otherworldly light. The ship bucked and heaved as electromagnetic storms battered its hull, alarms shrieking in protest. "Shields down to 20%, Zephyr reported, her usually calm voice edged with tension. "We can't take much more of this." Samuel leaned into the controls, his jaw set with determination as he guided the ship through the tempest. Gradually a shape began to emerge from the churning gases, a structure of titanic proportions, its angular lines and gleaming metal unmistakably human in design. "There," Samuel pointed, a surge of excitement and trepidation rising in his chest. "That's it, that's our source." As they drew closer, the station's details resolved, and with them a chilling realization. The structure was not just large, it was gargantuan, dwarfing even their mighty warship. Its surface bristled with gun emplacements and sensor arrays, a silent testament to its creator's prowess. Suddenly, the station came alive with a sinister hum, energy crackling along its hull. Beams of searing light lanced out, filling the void with a web of deadly energy. "Evasive maneuvers!" Samuel barked, wrenching the ship into a dizzying spiral. The beams sliced past, so close he could feel their heat through the hull. The ship shuddered as a glancing blow seared its shields, alarms blaring in renewed urgency. They danced through the deadly barrage, the ship's engines straining as Samuel pushed them to their limits. Sweat beaded on his brow, his focus absolute as he threaded the ship through gaps in the station's fire, searching for a way in. "There," Corvin shouted, pointing to a small, unassuming opening on the station's flank. "That looks like a docking bay." Samuel didn't hesitate. With a final, desperate surge of speed, he plunged the ship towards the opening, the hull groaning as the station's tractor beams seized them, dragging them in. They hit the deck hard, the ship skidding across the hangar floor in a shower of sparks. For a moment there was only the hiss of cooling metal and the ragged breathing of the crew. Then, slowly, deliberately, Samuel unstrapped himself from his seat. "Suit up," he said, his voice echoing in the sudden stillness. "We're going in." The station's interior was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, each one filled with technology beyond their wildest dreams. Holographic displays flickered to life as they passed, alien text scrolling across their surfaces. Strange devices hummed with power, their purpose tantalizingly out of reach. As they delved deeper, a sense of unease began to grow. The station was too quiet, too still. Where were the inhabitants, the creators of this marvel? Suddenly a flicker of movement caught Samuel's eye. He spun, his weapon raised, but it was only a hologram, sputtering to life in the center of the chamber. The image resolved, and Samuel felt his breath catch in his throat. It was a human, or at least a representation of one. Tall and proud, clad in a uniform of an unfamiliar design. The figure began to speak, its voice echoing with the weight of ages. "If you are seeing this," it said, "then our worst fears have come to pass. The Protheans have found us, and our civilization stands on the brink of annihilation." Samuel and his team listened, transfixed as the recording played out. It spoke of a war, vast and terrible, waged across the stars, of the Protheans' relentless advance, their superior technology and numbers overwhelming humanity's defenses, of a desperate final gambit to ensure that something of their legacy would survive. "This station," the figure said, "is our last hope. A beacon designed to sleep until the time is right, then awaken our hidden creations across the galaxy. With this technology, our descendants will have the power to stand against the Protheans, to reclaim what was lost, The figure's eyes seemed to bore into Samuel's, a plea and a challenge all in one. You are our legacy, our future. The mantle of responsibility falls to you now. Take up our cause, finish what we started, and know that even in our darkest hour, humanity's light will never be extinguished. The hologram flickered and died, leaving them in stunned silence. Samuel could feel the weight of those words settling on his shoulders, a burden and a purpose all at once. But before he could speak, before he could begin to process the magnitude of what they had learned, the chamber shook with a sudden, violent impact. Dust rained from the ceiling, alarms blaring to life. The architect, Odin growled, his hand going to his weapon. They've found us. Samuel was already moving, racing towards the chamber's heart where a pulsing, luminous core hung suspended. The beacon, humanity's last hope, their final defiance against the darkness. He heard the sounds of battle erupting behind him, the sizzle of plasma and the roar of explosions. His team buying him time with their lives. Samuel's heart ached, but he did not slow. He could not. The core loomed before him, a column of swirling energy and ancient power. Samuel reached out, his fingers brushing the control panel, and staggered as a bolt of searing pain ripped through his shoulder. He spun, his weapon rising, and saw the architect's soldiers pouring into the chamber, their weapons spitting death. Samuel fired back, his shots precise even as agony lanced through him with every movement. He saw Odin fall, the Barzan's scales scorched and blackened, saw Zephyr and Corvin, back to back, their weapons blazing until they were swallowed by a storm of plasma. With a cry of defiance and despair, Samuel lunged for the controls, his blood-slicked fingers scrabbling for purchase. More shots tore into him, his vision blurring, his breath coming in ragged gasps. But he did not stop. He could not stop. With the last of his strength, with the last of his will, Samuel slammed his hand down on the activation panel. The core pulsed, a wave of blinding energy erupting from its heart, sweeping out across the chamber, across the station, across the stars themselves. And as the light consumed him, as the pain faded and the darkness closed in, Samuel felt a flicker of hope amidst the grief and the loss. The beacon was active. The signal was sent. Humanity's legacy would endure. Even if he would not. The light took him, and Samuel Young, the last of the human warriors, the man who had carried the fate of the galaxy on his shoulders, knew no more. Samuel opened his eyes, the harsh glare of the medical bay lights making him squint. His body ached, the wounds from the battle still raw and tender despite the advanced treatments. As his vision cleared, he saw Odin and the other survivors of his team gathered around his bed. "What happened?" Samuel croaked, his throat dry and scratchy. Odin leaned forward, his scaled face etched with exhaustion and relief. "We did it, Samuel. The beacon's activated. But we barely made it out. The architect's forces were right on our heels." Samuel struggled to sit up, ignoring the sharp pain that lanced through his body. "The beacon, is it working? Did the signal go out?" Zephyr nodded, her usually vibrant features drawn and somber. "It's working, all right. Reports are coming in from all over the galaxy. Ancient human tech is waking up everywhere." But there was something in her tone, a hesitation that made Samuel's gut clench. "What is it? What's wrong?" Corvin, the grizzled mercenary, stepped forward. "It's the Protheans, Samuel. They're awake too, and they're pissed." Samuel's heart sank. The Protheans, the ancient enemy that had driven humanity to the brink of extinction, the ones they had hoped to defeat by activating the beacon. Now, it seemed, they had only succeeded in stirring the hornet's nest. "How bad is it?" he asked, dreading the answer. "Bad," Odin said grimly. "They're mobilizing their forces, preparing for war, and the Galactic Council, well, let's just say they're not exactly united on how to respond." Samuel closed his eyes, the weight of the galaxy seeming to settle on his shoulders. They had won the battle, but the war, it seemed, was just beginning. A commotion at the door made them all turn. A tall, slender figure strode into the room, flanked by two hulking bodyguards. Samuel's eyes widened as he recognized the distinctive features of a Prothean. "What the hell is this?" Corvin growled, his hand dropping to his weapon. The Prothean raised its hands in a placating gesture. "Peace, human. I come not as an enemy, but as an ally." Samuel stared at the alien, his mind racing. A Prothean here. Now, what game were they playing? "Explain," he said, his voice hard. "Quickly." The Prothean inclined its head. "I am Javik, a member of the dissident faction. We seek to end this war before it begins, to find a path to coexistence with humanity." Samuel barked a harsh laugh. "Coexistence? Your kind tried to wipe us out. Why should we trust you now?" Havik's eyes met his, unflinching. "Because, Samuel Young, we have a common enemy. The hardliners in our government, the ones who seek to exterminate your species. They are the true threat to both our peoples." Samuel frowned, his instincts warring with his logic. Could he trust this Prothean? Could he afford not to? "An alliance," Havik said simply. "We share our intelligence on the Prothean military, help you prepare your defenses. In return, you help us reach out to the awakened human colonies, convince them to join us in seeking peace." Samuel looked to his team, saw the doubt and uncertainty in their eyes, but he also saw the determination, the willingness to fight for what was right. "I need to think about this," he said finally. "Give me some time." Havik nodded, his expression unreadable. "Of course, but do not take too long, Samuel Young. Time is a luxury we do not have." With that, the Prothean turned and strode from the room, his bodyguards falling into step behind him. Samuel sank back onto the bed, his mind awhirl. An alliance with the Protheans. It seemed unthinkable. But what choice did they have? The galaxy was on the brink of war, and they needed every ally they could get. He turned to Odin, his face grim. "Get me a line to the Galactic Council. We need to—" But before he could finish, an alarm blared through the ship, red lights flashing in warning. Zephyr's face paled as she read the incoming data on her wrist display. "It's a Prothean fleet, Samuel. Massive. And they're heading straight for the Galactic Council's capital." Samuel's heart raced. The Protheans were making their move, seeking to cut off the head of the galactic government before the war even began. If they succeeded. He looked to his team, saw the resolve in their eyes. They had fought too hard, sacrificed too much to let it end like this. "Get the ships ready," he ordered, his voice ringing with command. "We're going in." But even as they scrambled to action, Samuel's mind was racing. Havik's offer echoed in his thoughts, a tantalizing possibility. An alliance with the Prothean dissidents could change everything, give them a fighting chance against the hardliners. But could he trust them? Could he take that risk with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance? He closed his eyes, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The Prothean fleet was coming, and time was running out. He had to choose, and choose quickly. The fate of humanity, of the entire galaxy, rested on his next move. Samuel closed his eyes, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The Prothean fleet was coming, and time was running out. He had to choose, and choose quickly. With a deep breath, he opened his eyes, his resolve hardening. "Javik," he said, turning to the Prothean diplomat, "I'm in. What's the plan?" Havik's eyes glinted with a mix of relief and determination. "We strike at their command ships," he said, bringing up a holographic display of the Prothean fleet. "Disrupt their coordination, sow chaos in their ranks. Meanwhile, I'll work with Odin to rally support among the council races and the awakened human colonies." Samuel nodded, his mind already racing with tactical possibilities. "Hit-and-run attacks," he mused, studying the display. "We use the speed and stealth of our ships to our advantage, strike hard and fast, then fade away before they can respond." The bridge of the ancient human warship hummed with activity as Samuel and his team prepared for their first strike. Zephyr's fingers danced over her console, plotting vectors and calculating jump points. Corvin stood at the weapons station, his face bathed in the eerie glow of the targeting displays. "Target locked," Corvin reported, his voice tense. "Prothean command ship dead ahead." Samuel gripped the arms of his chair, his heart pounding. "Engage cloak," he ordered. "Take us in, Zephyr." The ship shimmered, vanishing from sensors as it slipped through the void towards the unsuspecting Protheans. They closed the distance rapidly, the command ship growing larger in their view screens. A barrage of missiles erupted from the ship's launch bays, streaking towards the Prothean vessel. They impacted along its hull, explosions blossoming in the darkness. The command ship reeled, its shields flickering. "Direct hits," Corvin reported, a fierce grin on his face. "Their shields are down." "Hit them again," Samuel ordered. "Target their engines, weapons, communications. I want that ship out of the fight." They struck again and again, precision shots crippling the Prothean vessel. Around them, the Prothean fleet was in chaos, ships milling about in confusion as they tried to locate their attacker. "They're launching fighters," Zephyr warned, her eyes glued to her screens. "Bring us about," Samuel commanded. "Prepare for jump." The ship banked hard, the stars wheeling dizzyingly in the view screens. Prothean fighters swarmed towards them, their weapons charging. "Jump!" Samuel shouted. The ship leapt forward, the fighters vanishing behind them as they plunged into the swirling vortex of hyperspace. In the brief calm, Samuel allowed himself a small smile. One down, many more to go. Across the galaxy, Odin and Javik stood before the Galactic Council, their voices impassioned as they pleaded their case. They spoke of the Prothean threat, of the need for unity in the face of annihilation. "The Protheans seek to exterminate us all," Odin rumbled, his massive form tense with emotion. "Humanity, Barzan, Zainari, Corvin, we must stand together, or we will fall alone." There were murmurs of dissent, of fear and uncertainty, but there were also nods of agreement, of determination. Slowly, painfully, a coalition began to form. In the awakened human colonies, the story was the same. Javik and Odin met with leaders and representatives, arguing, persuading, sometimes even begging. They showed recordings of Samuel's battles, of the ancient human warships standing against the Prothean onslaught. "This is our fight," Javik insisted, his voice ringing with conviction. "Our chance to reclaim our place in the galaxy. Will you stand with us?" And one by one the colonies pledged their support, their ships and soldiers rallying to the cause. A fleet began to gather, human and alien vessels standing side by side, ready to face the oncoming storm. But even as hope grew, so too did the Prothean threat. Their fleet surged forward, an unstoppable tide of metal and fury, headed straight for the heart of the Galactic Council. On the bridge of his battered warship, Samuel watched the Prothean armada approach, his face grim. They had fought hard, struck deep, but it wasn't enough. The Protheans were too many, their ships too strong. He looked around at his crew, at the faces of those who had followed him into hell and back. They were tired, battered, but unbroken. They would fight to the end, he knew, fight for a future they might never see. "This is it," he said softly, his voice carrying in the stillness. "One last stand, one last chance to make a difference." He turned to Odin, the Barzan scales glinting in the light of the displays. "Signal the fleet," he said. Tell them it's been an honor." Odin nodded, his eyes solemn. "The honor has been ours, Samuel." Samuel turned back to the view screens, to the sea of Prothean ships bearing down on them. He took a deep breath, his hand hovering over the weapons controls. "For Earth," he whispered, "for the galaxy!" And with a final defiant roar, he led his ship, his crew, his fleet into the jaws of oblivion. The battle was joined, the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. Ships clashed, weapons flared, and the very fabric of space seemed to shudder under the onslaught. Samuel's ship danced through the chaos, its weapons blazing, its shields straining under the barrage of enemy fire. Around him, his fleet fought with a desperate, savage fury, human and alien crews united in their determination to stand, to fight, to win. But the Protheans were relentless, their ships seemingly endless. For every vessel Samuel's fleet destroyed, 2 more took its place. They were being pushed back, slowly but surely, the weight of numbers bearing down on them like an irresistible tide. On the bridge, alarms blared, consoles sparked and smoked. Samuel gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white, as another volley of Prothean fire rocked the ship. "Shields down to 20%, Zephyr reported, her voice taut with strain. "Hull breaches on decks 4, 7, and 12. Samuel gritted his teeth, his mind racing. They couldn't hold out much longer, but maybe they didn't need to. His eyes fell on the massive form of the Prothean flagship, its hull bristling with weapons, its engines glowing with the heat of 1,000 suns. If they could take that ship out, if they could cut the head off the snake. The mercenary checked his console, his face grim. "A handful of Spectre-class warheads," he reported, "but Samuel, at this range—" "I know," Samuel said softly. "Plot a course, straight for the flagship's bridge." There was a moment of stunned silence. Then Odin spoke, his voice heavy with understanding. "A collision course." Samuel nodded, his eyes never leaving the Prothean ship. "We take that flagship out, we buy the fleet time. Time for reinforcements to arrive, for the tide to turn." One by one they nodded, their faces set with grim determination. They knew the stakes, they knew the cost. "Course plotted," Zephyr said, her voice steady. "Ready on your command." Samuel closed his eyes for a moment, the faces of those he had lost, those he had fought for, flashing through his mind. Then he opened them, his gaze hard and clear. "Ramming speed," he ordered. "Take us in." The ship surged forward, its engines screaming as it tore through the battle, straight towards the looming bulk of the Prothean flagship. Enemy fire lanced out, hammering at their shields, their hull. But they didn't falter, didn't swerve. In the final moments, Samuel opened a channel to the fleet, his voice ringing out across the comm lines. "This is Samuel Young," he said, his words calm and clear. "It's been an honor serving with you all. Remember us. Remember what we fought for." And with those final words, with a last defiant roar of engines, the ship slammed into the Prothean flagship, a lance of fire and fury piercing its heart. The two vessels, locked in a final, fatal embrace, plummeted towards the planet below, trailing flames and debris. On the surface, amidst the smoking ruin of the crashed ships, a lone figure stirred. Samuel, battered and broken, clawed his way out of the wreckage, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Every movement was agony, every breath a struggle, but he pushed on, driven by a will that refused to yield. He staggered to his feet, his vision blurring, his mind reeling. And there, emerging from the smoke and the flames, came another figure, tall and proud, clad in the armor of a Prothean commander. The two stood face to face, the human and the Prothean, the weight of centuries of conflict hanging between them. The Prothean's eyes were hard, filled with a hatred that burned like a sun. "Your species," it spat, its voice dripping with contempt. "You should have stayed dead." Samuel lifted his head, meeting that gaze without flinching. "We're hard to kill," he said, his voice rough but strong. "We don't give up. We don't back down." Samuel smiled, a smile that held no mirth, only a grim, unyielding determination. "Maybe," he said softly, "but not before I take you with me." And with a roar of defiance he charged, his body screaming in protest, his vision narrowing to a single searing point. The Prothean met him head-on, and they clashed in a whirlwind of fists and fury, of blood and rage. And in the end, as the dust settled and the fires burned low, only one was left standing. Samuel, his body shattered, his lifeblood seeping into the thirsty ground, looked down at the broken form of his foe, and he knew that it was over. He slumped to the ground, his back against the wreckage of his ship, his eyes turning to the sky. And there, amidst the swirling smoke and the dancing flames, a small, battered ship appeared, bearing the markings of the Galactic Council. "You did it," the Barzan said, his voice thick with emotion. "The Council has pledged its support. The colonies are rallying. The tide is turning." Samuel smiled, a smile of peace, of contentment. "Good," he whispered. "That's good." His eyes drifted closed, his breath growing shallow. In his mind's eye he saw them all, his crew, his friends, all those who had fought and died by his side. He saw the galaxy, free and united, a legacy bought with blood and sacrifice. And with those words, with that final peaceful thought, Samuel Young, hero of the galaxy, slipped away, his duty done, his fight at last at an end. In the years to come, the galaxy would remember. They would remember the man who had given everything, who had stood against the darkness and the fury, and who had prevailed. They would build statues in his honor, sing songs of his courage, whisper his name as a prayer, a hope, a promise. But in that moment, on that distant, war-torn world, there was only silence. A silence of respect, of reverence, for the man who had changed the course of history, who had given the galaxy a chance to be something more. Samuel Young, the human who had united the stars, was gone. But his legacy, his dream, would endure, a shining beacon in the night, guiding the way to a brighter future. It was a future he would never see, but it was a future he had made possible. And for that most precious of gifts, the galaxy would forever be in his debt. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.